I'm Deirdre Vervo, your host today of Let's Talk Seniors, Memory Care Issues, Alzheimer's, Dementia, and Parkinson's. I'm also the owner of Just Like Home, have 2 memory care homes in Shelton. And today we have a very special guest on. As our loved ones age, there are many challenges and transitions. What if they're just not themselves? What should we do? It's a tough question. Marcie Dimenstein is a clinical social worker and therapist with a degree from the prestigious Fordham University. She's a care manager for elders. She facilitates support when the family cannot. She does everything from crisis intervention and hospital discharge planning to maximizing benefits. She helps make difficult decisions with the family. She's also a professional member of Aging Life Care Association. The topic is near and dear to her own heart, as you'll hear, as her own husband was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. Today, she's here to answer the question, what do I do? My loved one is not the same. And with that, Marcie. Welcome, Marcie. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
I really appreciate it. So I know this is a topic near and dear to your heart. Because you had a husband that had early onset dementia and you weren't sure what was going on with him. So why don't you first tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into being an elder pathways worker? I know you started as a social worker, but I think it all flows right to what you're doing now and why.
Yeah, it did. So I got married late. I was and my husband was a little bit older than me. He was 50. And after a few years, something was different. I didn't know what. I was a social worker, so I should have been able to figure it out. It wasn't ADHD, all the things that are being thrown around these days. So I brought him to a neuropsychologist. That's a person who does neurological testing, and we can talk about how that's used now because it's 11 years later. So it's a little bit different, but he was willing because I said, listen, you're going to get tested because otherwise we're headed to divorce. So he was tested and he was labeled with mild cognitive disorder, serious. So trying to understand, and there was financial problems that he was involved with, and there was all sorts of things. So I did some research and saw where this was headed, but figured it's all right. I'm a social worker. I know everything, we know everything, right? Everybody knows everything until you're challenged. And I was challenged because in 2011 or 12, I had a stroke, and I, from my hospital bed, was trying to call to set up resources for my husband. And it was very challenging. Now, luckily, I had a number of connections, and I was able to get him home health, and I was able to get him, he was already set up at the senior center. So we were able to get some things in place. But I thought, this is crazy. It's so hard. So that's really, I worked until his passing. And he, when he passed, I left what I was doing. I was running a large behavioral health center in Connecticut. It was statewide. And went to work for hospice for a little while and worked for an agency on aging for a little while. An agency on aging is great resources if people don't have financial means. And then decided, I cared for my father who had congestive heart failure. And he was also having small strokes, not knowing that he was having small strokes, but because his vascular issues were affecting his brain, he wasn't making great decisions. So I cared for him, and he was my first client, really, and set up the business.
Oh my goodness. So
Yeah.
really made a lemonade out of lemons out of
Yes.
adversity
Yeah.
came, but you saw a need. You saw a need. You saw how hard.
Absolutely. I saw the need for people who didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
Um, this morning I was on a call with a gentleman whose brother has Parkinson's and is giving up. And so we talked about strategies. What do you do when he's giving up? He's at a distance. So when can he visit? What can he do? So yeah, I help a number of different people figure out what they need and how to do it.
So let's talk first about Elder Pathways. So your company, Elder Pathways, you are a senior geriatric
Care
provider,
manager.
care manager. So
Mhm.
people come to you with all different things. Like, for
Sure.
instance, this morning, my brother has Parkinson's and he doesn't live near me. They come to you with what other kinds of issues?
Well, a woman I worked with, a hospice nurse called me and said, I was given your name because there's this woman whose 99-year-old mother just died, and she's just sitting in her living room. She doesn't know what to do with herself. Um, so she had no family, no connections, at least apparently. So I went out and did an assessment of what her needs were, and found that she did have a trust. She did have a brother, and connected her up with those. And she is in assisted living right now, living pretty happily.
So oftentimes loved ones will call you because they're concerned about what's happening with one of their.
Yeah, very often it's not the individual, but sometimes it is. Sometimes the person says, all of my friends tell me I need help. I don't know what kind of help I need.
Okay.
Yeah, or my doctor says I need something, but I don't understand what he's saying. So any kind of need. I'm on the assisted, excuse me, the Aging Life Care Management has a directory to search. And so people find me that way. People find me from word of mouth. They're lawyers, they're financial advisors, and others.
Awesome. So now, when you realize somebody's not the same, I actually have a girlfriend who she's married, but in her 70s, and I'm pretty sure it's early stages of dementia. What does somebody do? What can you do? Like, how can I help my girlfriend? Like, what are the first step?
Well, it depends on your relationship. So, sometimes it could be just asking the husband, what does she need? Do you need any help? There are ways to get you help. Um, it can be talking to her. Early in dementia is the toughest stage for people who are suffering. It is a time that I'm very sorry. It's a time that they're scared. They're fearful about losing themselves, losing their mind. They drive places that don't all of a sudden don't look familiar to them. Um, and telling them that you understand, that it's okay, that there's things that could be done. Um, Having them talk to their primary care doctor. Um, I've had people who didn't have a spouse fax things into primary care doctors just to say, I've seen this behavior and I'm really nervous about her. I don't have any right to any information, but I need you to know this. So
Is that where somebody would start, or would they go to what you said before, a neuropsychologist?
the first stage would be, unless you know your way around the healthcare system very well, a primary care doctor.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if they don't really know about Alzheimer's, or what are they going to do? Let's say they do know about dementia, or They think it looks a
Well,
little like dementia. What are they going to
yeah,
do? Are they
yeah.
send you to
So
a
they'll
neuro?
probably start them on a medication. There are a couple of medications that are helpful early in the dementia process because it slows down the process. They might not start a medication and make a referral to a dementia specialist. There's all sorts of people who can diagnose dementia, um, including a neuropsychologist. But there are centers. In Hamden here, there's a general psychiatry, so psychiatrists who specialize in dementia. There are neurologists who specialize in dementia. So there's lots of avenues to proceed,
So
depending on your.
do you always need a brain scan?
Not necessarily, because a brain scan early on may not show, it will show some changes. But what we've found is that many people have the changes in the brain. As we get older, our brain shrinks a little bit. There are changes in the gray matter. There are certain signs that certainly will show Alzheimer's versus vascular dementia because there's strokes that show up. But it's a PET scan, which is a subset of a MRI. And insurance doesn't like to pay for those.
Mm-hmm.
So
but
you
if
need
you
some
want, if you want to pay yourself,
yeah, you might.
do it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Sure.
And is that recommended, like to get a baseline if you think somebody's been dementia? Is there any good reason to get a baseline and then see what happens? Or
for some people, it's just so clear what's going on that they don't have a history of psychiatric issues, or they do have a history of psychiatric issues, and you're trying to make a distinction between a psychiatric issue and a dementia. So I consider it two diseases for Alzheimer's. There's early onset Alzheimer's as well as late onset. For late onset, there's usually no need for a brain scan because it won't tell us anything about how to treat the person. Where for early onset Alzheimer's with a young person, your friend who's 60 or 70, it might be helpful.
Yeah. So with your husband being so young, he was in his 50s, but he had it for 20 years. Did he have it so long because he had early onset, or because you were doing all the right things and treating it?
So generally, Alzheimer's is felt to have started 10 years before it's diagnosed. That there are small signs, and if the person were truly honest and weren't protecting themselves, they might talk about something's not right, or I get real scared sometimes, and it could look like a psychiatric illness, right? It could look like they're not going out as often because they're afraid of being lost, or the crowds are just too intense for them. So it might look like a psychiatric illness, and it's hard to get a differentiation. Sometimes they're identified with psychiatric illness and they're treated for it, but they don't respond. So that's a way to find out. So there are many pathways to finding out.
Okay. Well, once you find out, then what?
So there are a number of options, but it's really important to plan because Alzheimer's or dementias. So dementia is a large umbrella. And there are, I think, 57 or 100 or something kinds of dementia along in that pathway. So when we talk about Alzheimer's and dementia, I'm talking interchangeably, which is really the dementia. So there is a pathway, whether it's frontal temporal, whether it is Lewy bodies, whether it's Alzheimer's or vascular dementia, which are the most common. So the person is going to start losing their ability to manage. So what are we going to do to support them? Are we the ones who are going to be able to dress them or care for them? And I'm going to talk about caretaking in a little bit, but who's that going to be? Is there a home health agency we want to ask for? I also have a lot of advice for people who want to just hire a person, because there's all sort of tax ramifications and insurance ramifications for that. What do they do during the day? Now you're talking about a young person, so you are theoretically young as well. So full time. So are they appropriate for a senior center? Do they need to move to an to a adult care center, which provides care for people with memory care issues? And what I found is very helpful for adults who say, I'm not ready for that. I don't want to deal with that. You can have them volunteer there. You make an arrangement with the center to volunteer at the center, and that makes a difference. So my husband went from a senior center to an adult day center, where he was showered 3 times a week, or twice a week rather. That they checked his medications, that I knew he was eating, he was socializing, because loneliness is terrible for people. As we learned during the COVID.
Yes, we did.
Yeah, it's just loneliness. So it was a terrible time for people. So as they keep progressing, they go to adult daycare. But what are you doing at home? Who's caring for him? And then, do you want to care for them at home? Do you want to move them into a aging center, an assisted care facility for memory care? Do you both want to move to an assisted living care center and he have memory care? So those are all decisions. Your wills and all that paperwork that I can help people with, which, you've got to get that organized. If you're the wife, hopefully not so much anymore, but do you know everything about finances that you need to know?
So Marcie, is, let's say the person, your spouse, can no longer, function, make decisions because they have dementia. Is everything covered by Medicare? Can they go on Medicaid if they're?
Yeah.
Or
So Medicare only covers medical expenses. This is all cash pay. Adult daycare is cash pay. So there's transportation available for free. Through each community has a community bus that through Connecticut Transit, you can get free transportation. But that's why planning has to be done. So when I found out that my husband was ill, he had spent $20,000 that I didn't have any idea where it was. So I stopped his access to credit cards. I stopped, there's all sorts of things people can do to put a wall together with credit cards that don't work, with checks that don't go anywhere, and to protect their
pride.
Their pride, because they have a right to that self-pride, and not to be attacked with those things. So part of the planning process is what's going to happen when they go into either an assisted living care facility or a long-term care facility, if they do, or home health. That's a lot of money. And so we have to look at what is available in the home. There are people who can sufficiently care for their people. I wasn't one. So I ended up having to make plans to go on Medicaid for him, which is just his care. And it's a 9-month process for me. It was back then.
So you can have a spouse go on Medicaid.
Yes.
Okay. So, But what about people that can't afford like the adult daycare and all, and they have,
Okay.
there's no
So,
program for it if they have like, let's say they're already on Medicaid and
okay.
you know, they don't have the money and they
So
don't have a
Medicaid does pay for that, as does the Agency on Aging. So for some people, there's what's called a waiver. It's a Medicaid waiver that for people who have some money but aren't able to afford the costs of this, they apply for a waiver and they only pay a small percentage of the cost of adult care. Yeah. But assisted living is still expensive.
Now, in our state, you know, which I learned years ago, that Medicaid is a bucket of money from the federal government, and each state is given the money to do as they
Mhm.
please. And I know there's like 13 states that do cover assisted living and memory care with Medicaid. We're not one of them.
No.
So, what happens when people don't have the money, need to go into a memory care home? Is there only option to go to a nursing home because Medicaid will pay for that? And if they're ineligible for nursing home because they're not ill, they just have memory issues, where do they go?
The Agency on Aging can help by getting people into the home. Um, there, there are systems that are trying to improve. Palliative care is trying to get out to come to the home, and that would be covered by Medicare. Um, but it's very slow in certain parts of the state. Um, and like New Haven, Yale is doing some, but not enough right now.
So,
Um,
Marcy, you're saying they're trying to get people that will go to your home or get the person with dementia into a home?
no, these are still going into your home.
Okay. But
Yeah.
what if you know, it's unsafe, like they're wandering, it's unsafe, and they have no money? What can they do? I have people call me a lot about this, you know,
Right.
because,
There isn't a good response. If
no,
there is no money, I do get calls like that as well. And I just, so Medicaid does pay for a lot in mental health. And so, really, what we're talking about is having to lobby, having to get their, I have a person with with a mental health issue that I can't find a residential home for because she's 72, so she's too old. She has money, but and the mental health beds are all for poor people, people on Medicaid. So also the other side of that. So yeah, on both sides for both mental health issues and for memory care issues, there is a dearth of services at that point. If someone is alone and at home and not safe, um, ultimately they would end up in a nursing home if there's not somebody helping.
well, I have been told there's a few places, excuse me, state places. I think one's in New Haven that do take people on Medicaid for assisted living, but there's a long waiting list. Do you know these places that I'm talking about? I don't know if it's one place or something I wanted to look up, but there's a few that will take people for assisted living.
Well, they
Um,
won't. So my experience is there are a few places that will accept people who will need Medicare, but not for the first year or so. So they're expecting to be paid cash for a year and then go on Medicaid. So
okay.
I don't know of it. I would love to hear about those places because there's, yeah,
I
very
know.
good cares there. And it's where they can go to just be because people can just be for a long time. You can have Alzheimer's for a long time.
Yeah, it's a tough one because you don't want to send somebody to a nursing home where they're, you know, they're not participating in anything. There's no activities. There's, you know, they're not bedridden. So it's a
Yeah.
really tough situation here in
Yeah.
Connecticut.
Yeah.
My
There are some nursing homes that do some specialized programming, but there's not a lot of those.
my my aunt from she was living in New Mexico during COVID. She had long COVID, so she had lost like 40 pounds and didn't even realize it. And she was
Mm,
sick. And
yeah.
I did a whole Medicaid spend down for her and moved her to Arizona because she's all there mentally, but she was in a walker now. She's in a wheelchair. Medicaid pays for assisted living in Arizona. So she's in a beautiful place. She loves it, paid for by Medicaid. And she'll probably be there quite a while. And, it's awesome. So I often tell people, like, do you have siblings that live in other states? Because there are states that take Medicaid for assisted living and memory care. We're just not one. And most of the Northeast states are not.
Of course, the issue is that Medicaid pays poorly. So that you have to wonder about some of the quality of care issues that happen for facilities that are, people have looked at taking Medicaid and said, no, I'm not going to take Medicaid because I'm getting a quarter of the money that I would, and I can't pay for my services. I can't pay to have all those rich services that are expected.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one. So what you're basically saying is people should go first to their primary care doctor and then take it from there, see if they need a neurologist or a psychiatric specialist to get some sort of baseline, especially if they're younger.
Right. Yes.
And if they're older and you have somebody who's 90 and they just show signs of dementia, this is not all that necessary.
Right. Right. Well, so sometimes it is to help reduce the symptomatology. So we were talking about the brain scan particularly, but hopefully there's some new literature out that says there's going to be a blood test. So looking for that to happen.
Wow.
And yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Yeah, the field is changing every day.
Also, I think, and I'm guessing going to recommend that once you find somebody has dementia or Alzheimer's or seems to have a lot of signs of that, even if they're older, that they should still go to see their doctor because there are things you could do to keep them calmer and not have them like it's like a hurricane in their head.
Caring for a person is, as you know, with Just Like Home, caring for people with dementia is a unique playground. And, it's how do we keep people happy? How do we keep people with purpose, even though they have dementia? Because dementia is just a symptom. People have diabetes. People have all sorts of chronic illnesses, and we still make a life for them. Yeah.
Yes, because they could have it quite a while, and they could be well. My mother-in-law, she took no medicine. She just had dementia that kept getting worse and worse and worse. But she was not sick in any way, unless you include that. But so it's hard to know what to do. And I've seen, and I don't know if you've seen, that oftentimes spouses will cover up for the other one. So the kids don't even know how bad it is until like one spouse dies. This is a story I hear often. Like, oh my God, we had no idea about my mom because my dad was doing everything. She stopped driving, but my father usually drove anyway. My father paid the bills anyway. My father died and my mother was, not eating, and it wasn't depression. It was, they didn't know that she was not capable of anything. So a lot of cover up by the spouses and, denial, I guess, by.
Yeah, it is. It's denial, or it's just not putting it on their kids. We decided we're going to handle it and the kids don't have to worry about it. The important thing, I think, for all of us is that we have to have plans, that we have to have our wills in place. We have to have advanced directives in place. We have to have powers of attorneys. All of our paperwork should be together. When my husband was sick, I did mine as well as his before he was too ill. And when my daughter turned 18, she also did hers, just to get in the habit of having those paperwork done. So everybody should have it and have it done. And it has to be done. It should be looked at least every 5 years, not by an attorney.
Listen, Marcie, that's great advice, because I think people don't realize if you're not married and you're 30 years old, which is very typically the case these days, your parents aren't automatically in charge of you or your power of attorney. Like, they don't realize that. My daughter was living away in another country, and one of her fellow people she was teaching with died, and she had to find their family on
Right.
Facebook. And they were in another country, and they didn't have the power to his bank account or the right to airlift him. Like, they had to go through a lot of gyrations. So people don't realize that your daughter was smart at 18, or you were smart to tell her, because people just assume, oh, I have a brother, sister, or my parents. No, that's, you
That's
got to go
right.
to court and get appointed. So why do that? Save them the
Yeah.
problem. Yeah. So everybody needs that paperwork. And planning is essential, because most people don't have an endless bucket of money. So you need to plan. And it's what I tell people to come and see my place, even if you don't need it for another year for your mom. Rule
Right.
things in and out, rule other places in and out. Take tours now. Let your
Yeah.
parent decide if they can, see what you like. Because at any moment, something could happen, like you had a stroke. Like any moment, they could break a hip and,
That's
need to go somewhere. Like at any moment, things can happen. So it's
yeah.
really smart
And
to.
another population I just want to get in, I know we're running a little bit over, but is the, I hate the word that they're using, senior orphan. The person who is a senior, who is not married, does not have those connections or partners, and also doesn't have children, that I'm getting more calls from those people who are looking to get a plan in place, that everything's all set and I don't have to worry about it. So who's going to be their power of attorney? Who's going to be, all of that? And those senior orphans are it's a growing number of people. Certainly women who are widowed in their 50s are part of that population, but men as well. I have a couple of men like that. And so I just check in with them quarterly, just to check in and see how you're doing and stay in touch. Has
That's
anything changed medically?
That's awesome. Marcy, I have a gentleman in my life who's almost 90, and his wife died like a dozen years ago. No kids. Same
Right.
exact story, but he does have a nephew, like in Pennsylvania. And
Yeah.
every time I talk to him, I'm like, have you gotten your nephew as your power of attorney yet, or anything? Because you're still living in your house and he's not in good shape. And I'm like, make it easy for him, like, what are you doing?
So power of attorney forms are on the Secretary of State's website. You can just take one to the bank and get it witnessed, and you have a power of attorney. You don't need to go to a lawyer. I know some people are very hesitant about that, but just get something in writing that's been witnessed, so that his nephew will be able to do that for him when it's time. Because the only truth is, we're all going to die. We're all going to be, all of us hope that we're going to go to sleep and not wake up. But for
Yeah.
most people, there are a small proportion of people who that's what happens. But for most people, they're sick first or in need.
That's a tough one. But yeah, I can see why you're getting a lot of calls from people that
Mm-hmm.
don't have family, or estranged from family, or they don't trust their family to be
Yeah.
their power attorney or their,
Yeah.
healthcare proxy. So
Yeah.
then you can do that, right? You can step in and help them with that.
I can help them figure out who should do it. I've only
Yeah.
been power of attorney for a couple of people. It's been very short term, um, because to make that promise to a person, I'm 66. I'm not, 50 anymore. So I need to be careful about making promises to people that I don't end up keeping.
Yeah,
So
I
power of
understand.
attorney is a different kind of promise. Yeah.
Well, Marcy, you are a wealth of information. Marcie
Thank
Dimenstein, Elder Pathways. If you want to get in touch with Marcy, her number's right here, 203-710-0500. And any parting words?
My website is elderpathways.com, so you can find me there as well. I think the important thing is that we're we're all aging, and that's something to be enjoyed and something to be treasured. And I can help people bring joy to that part of their life.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marcy. I appreciate it. It was great seeing you again. And I love
You
meeting you in
too.
person. So we will talk again. Thank you
Okay.
so much. All right.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Appreciate it. That was Marcie Dimenstein, again, Elder Pathways. If you would like to get in touch with her, 203-710-0500. And that was, I was taking notes actually. She answered many questions on what to do if you find your loved one is just not the same anymore. Start with going to your regular doctor and getting specialists from there, especially if early onset dementia. There are things you can do for early onset dementia. Even when you get it older, there are things the doctor can do to help with the symptoms of dementia. So Marcie, thank you so much. And if you need her services, again, Elder Pathways, 203-710-0500. Dear DeVervo saying thank you so much for joining us, and I will see you next time.